Now let's talk about the basic building blocks that you're going to use when data binding. The first thing is data context. Data context is a property that each framework element has that can be used to flow data into the screen. So for some screen of data that you want to hook data binding up to, you can think of it as a data context overlays that screen and provides ambient data to all of the elements within the screen. From a structural perspective, it's really that you can set a data context property on any element, and that data context flows down to all of the child elements that sit underneath it. So if we set the data context at a window level, all of the child elements within that window will have access to the same object that was set as the data context on the root window element. The next concept are bindings. Bindings provide the glue between a single element property, such as the text property on a text box, and a source object property, such as the first name property on a customer. Bindings allow you to read data in from the source object property into the target element property, and in two-way data binding, you can also flow data back from the target element property back into the source object property. Another important concept to do with binding is the way XAML parsing works. If you have some chunk of XAML that's going to be rendered on the screen, the XAML parser is going to kick in and start ripping through that XAML. Conceptually, it's top to bottom and left to right, and it's newing up objects and setting properties on those objects. As it rips through that XAML, it's going to find bindings, and when it first finds a binding, it goes ahead and does the initial evaluation of that binding, figures out what the source object is, it dereferences a property, gets a value out of that source object property, and puts it into the target element property that the binding is sitting on. Next, there's the concept of change notifications. Change notifications are important because if the data can change behind the scenes, you want the view to stay in sync with the real state of the data. So if you have some field and it's data bound to some source object property, if the source object property changes, an event can fire, and it can notify the binding that's up in the view, and that binding will know to go and retrieve the value and update the view to stay in sync. Likewise, if the data changes in the view, the target property can raise change notifications, which can trigger the binding to push the value back down into the source object property. So it's these change notifications that allow your real data behind the scenes to stay in sync with what the user sees on the screen.